What are the ramifications of the so-called federal government shutdown and the ramifications of President Trump's increasing militarization of American society? Join Richard Ebeling and me in this week's Libertarian Angle as we examine that question. Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and welcome to this week's Libertarian Angle, the show that you all know brings you the principled case for the libertarian philosophy. I'm joined, as I am every week, by my co-host, Richard Ebeling. Richard, good to see you again.
It's good to be with you and our viewers and listeners.
Yeah, okay, Richard, we're back to places where we've been before, and that is the shutdown, the federal government shutdown. Everybody's singing the shutdown blues. And uh, and so I thought we'd address that. I mean, we've gone through it before. It's, in my mind, just a great big charade. I have no doubts that the Republicans, that President Trump's going to cave, that they're going to strike some kind of deal. The employees are going to go back to work, get back pay, which effectively gives them a free vacation for the period of the shutdown, which really is doesn't bother me. I mean, the ideal world, you'd get all the so-called non-essential employees of the government, the bureaucrats, which to me encompasses most of them, and shut them down permanently, lay them off permanently. That's the ideal. But the in an imperfect world, you're better off with federal bureaucrats getting paid to do nothing than paying them to do something, because when they're doing something, they're destroying our liberty or our well-being. And I'm not really sure. Maybe you can educate me on exactly what gets shut down. From what I understand, it's the non-essential functions of government, but I don't really know what that means. I mean, if they're non-essential, why are they even there? Why don't they just leave and go into the private sector? Why don't they just shut down permanently? So I'm not really sure, what they mean by a shutdown. I know that the military is going strong, but that's not surprising. It's always been my conviction that the military controls the federal government anyway. They're not going to allow themselves to be shut down. I mean, after all, national security is at stake. All those foreigners would be invading America if the military got shut down. And then, of course, all the I don't know if all the welfare state programs, but the crown jewels, Medicare and Social Security, I'm sure they keep going. So I'm not really sure. I think it's really just a great big charade. This government shutdown business, I think they'll strike a deal. What do you think?
Well, I think that, of course, they will eventually strike a deal. It's a matter of how long the shutdown will go on for. Um, Sometimes it's gone on for a few days. Sometimes it's gone over for over a month. I believe it went over a month last time Trump was president. But as you were saying, it's all a charade because what is this really over? The Republicans did not finish the task in as timely a fashion as they say they wanted to determine all the appropriations in all the respective budget bills for the current fiscal year that just began today. That is the 2026 fiscal year, which began October 1, 2025. So they had this continuing resolution, which basically keeps government spending based upon all the previous bills passed by Congress, or as one Republican said, a continuation of the last Biden budget. Whereas the Democrats want to have that plus an increase and a restoration of certain things that were cut in Medicaid under the big beautiful bill earlier in the summer. And as a consequence of this, uh, the Republicans and the Democrats are at odds. The Republicans saying, just keep steady until we make some budget decisions later on with the previous Biden bill, whereas the Democrats are saying we want that plus even more. So it's really a fight over the status quo versus even a bigger government, with the Republicans not really calling for anything other than a continuing resolution through the end of November of current levels of spending. But as you said, it's a charade. The fact is, even Trump's threat through the Office of Management and Budget that some people will be let off and not be coming back. The bottom line is the deal will be cut, and all these people will be back in office. As you said, they will get back their back pay. They will have been basically given a paid vacation. With the only solace in this, also as you were suggesting, is that in an imperfect world with political involvement in so much, I would rather that these people stay home, even if I end up paying the taxes for their salaries, just to keep their noses out of my and everyone else's business. In other words, bribe someone not to be telling me how to live. That sounds like a perverse thing in an imperfect world, but I mean, what's the alternative? Of course, what really needs to be done, which unfortunately the Republicans are reluctant to, and in a practical matter do not have the votes, because they're not going to get the Democrats to go along with this as would be needed, is that they should think about a radical readjustment of what government spends on, the size and the scope of government, to move towards what they talk about as a balanced budget. But a balanced budget that, yes, introduces absolutely essential and right tax reductions, income tax, business taxes, and so on, but matching these even larger reductions of government spending across the board, including towards the elimination of the redistributive welfare state programs, of which, as you were saying, the primary ones are Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. Because, again, following up the phrasing you used, non-essential. Well, what is non-essential? From the classical liberal libertarian perspective, non-essential basically means those actions or activities or responsibilities the government doesn't have under the Constitution. And if you read the original Constitution and the amendments, uh, that would mean that approximately 90% of what government does today would be gone. When the World Almanac was first published, yeah, many of us buy each year and have at home for reference the World Almanac in 1868, a couple of 3 years after the end of the Civil War. The entire federal government was taken up by one page in the almanac. You had the president, the vice president, a much smaller handful of departments, the Department of War, the Department of State, what else was there? The Interior Department and so on. And then the rest of the page, besides a small handful of cabinet positions, were U.S. ambassadors to other countries. That was the entire federal government. Fast forward today, and if you pick up a copy of the same World Almanac, you find out that in very small print, all the bureaus, agencies, and departments of the federal government make up about between 5 and 7 pages in law in double columns. This program, this agency, this department, this bureau, the government has its heavy hand in virtually every aspect of human life in the United States. And like I said, those are the vast, vast majority of them in terms of the benchmark of the Constitution, non-essential functions and therefore non-essential employees who should be put back in the private sector to earn honest livings, making goods and services in the marketplace that consumers actually want.
Yeah, you raise a good point on that last one. Is that all these bureaucrats are living off of income that is taken from the private sector. And they're like leeches in a sense, that if they were put out into the private sector, you'd have a doubly positive effect. You'd have the people whose money is being taken from them to fund their salaries and activities. They'd now be able to keep that money, like additional savings or consumption, that they go out and buy things that they want to buy. Plus, these people who were in the government sector are now in the private sector producing wealth. And so you have this doubly positive effect. But Richard, just fundamentally speaking, Trump campaigned on the basis that he was going to bring fiscal responsibility to the federal government. I mean, we all know what the national debt is, what, 37 trillion now, or thereabouts. The amount that they're spending far exceeds the amount they're bringing in with taxes. Here's an opportunity, and he had the same opportunity with respect to the debt ceiling debate, is just let the government shut down. Think how much money could be saved of just letting it shut down. Now, you and I both know they're not going to shut down what they consider essential, but at the very least, they would be shutting down what they consider to be non-essential. What's wrong with that? why doesn't Trump just say, great, great, okay, shut down, awesome? What's the problem? And I think part of the problem is that people will notice very quickly that their lives go on as normal. And the federal officials don't want Americans to figure that out. If they were to figure out that their lives go on normal and might even be better off with this shutdown, that that would not be a good thing for the people that believe in this great big welfare warfare state. And I think that includes Trump. Trump believes in this system. And therefore, that's why I think he's going to strike a deal when he doesn't need to strike a deal. Now, as you point out, from a libertarian standpoint, it's not satisfactory for us just to balance the budget where you keep the DEA and the welfare state and the warfare state in existence. Our job has always been to cause people to think about what should be the role of government in a free society. You mentioned the constitutional powers. Um, Once people start thinking at that higher level, what should government be doing? Should it really be taking money from one group of people through force and giving it to another group of people? Is that really care and compassion? Well, of course it isn't, but people don't think about that. Do we really need a national security state? Why not a limited government republic like our ancestors favored and that we had in this country for over 100 years? I mean, if you look at, for example, my favorite time in history, as you know, is let's say 1890. There was no Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, income taxation, no income tax at all, no IRS. You didn't have to file your tax returns and your little deductions and stuff like that, and no drug war, no immigration controls to speak of. It was a remarkable period with the absence of all these things that you and I consider as non-essential, and they are non-essential. Our ancestors proved that. So that's why I think people should keep asking themselves, what should be the role of government in a free society? And once you arrive at the right conclusion on that, everything else falls into place because now people saying, what do we need a welfare state for? Why not voluntary charity? Why not leave people free to manage their own lives and their own resources? Seems to me that that's the real solution to this thing in terms of living in a free and prosperous society.
Well, the difficulty, the fundamental difficulty, is the fact, and most politicians are correct about this, is that because of how so many Americans have grown up and have become used to, they can't imagine a world without these government programs. In fact, it's interesting to note that when they talk about non-essential programs, what ends up being cut during these periods when the government is sort of quote shut down? The national parks. In the past shutdowns, they shut down passport and visa offices. I read one account that they're not even doing the visa and passport shutdowns. So you can still apply for a passport, a visa, or it's just minor things. But the important thing also is that you brought out is that while this is big news, whether it be the Fox News perspective or the CNN News perspective, you know, Fox being pro-Trump and CNN generally not, obviously. The assumption is that there's something shocking. These people are being told to stay home. They're not going to be doing their jobs for the American people. But whether this shutdown lasts a few days or a month or more, for the vast majority of us, we're not going to notice it. Now, part of us not noticing it is that part of what they consider essential is Social Security checks going out, Medicare and Medicaid payments being made, various and sundry other, what you and I would consider undesirable welfare state programs. So for that, they'll see that it doesn't matter, partly because a lot of things don't touch people's lives themselves regularly, but the programs that do touch them, that they would get very riled up about, will not be touched. In fact, if they were to shut down payments of Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, it would make people really think, do they have to have these programs? Do they want these programs? Could we imagine a world without these programs? Can we adjust and adapt to a world without these programs, both individually as well as through private associations and voluntary community efforts? It would make people think about that. But because they just sort of glide along, even in a shutdown, people are never challenged to raise the issue or talk about the issue as that do we really need the what are called these core elements of the welfare state? So it never comes up, it's never debated, it's never challenged, it never forces people to think. It may very well be that most Americans would say, yeah, you've taken it away, and I'm all shocked and bothered. I want them back. But at least the American population would be put in the position of having to ask themselves, do I really want, do I really need, and do I really want to pay for these programs? And by keeping those things essential, the fundamental issues of the redistributive state never arise.
All right, let's shift gears somewhat. We've been talking about the warfare state, the national security state as part of this discussion. Um, there's been some developments in that area that I consider very ominous. That, as we all know, Trump's been sending troops into at least Los Angeles, Washington, D.C. He's now threatening or promising to send troops into Portland and other cities, Chicago, um, other cities. And they're National Guard troops, but his rationale is that he wants to maintain law and order. And I think that raises, of course, the drug war that he's a big supporter of. And as we pointed out, gosh, since our inception here at FFF 35 years ago, the drug war engenders violence. I mean, I would say it's the cause of most of the violence in American society. Turf wars, gang wars, burglaries, robberies, addicts trying to get the money to pay exorbitant black market prices. And so he's using the violence of the drug war as an excuse or a justification to militarize society, and he's normalizing troops in American cities, uh, which is a very ominous sign. And because when you talk about troops in cities, you're not talking about a free society. And when you combine it with the ICE forces, Immigration Customs Enforcement, the Border Patrol, uh, you've got armed agents with masks, without uniforms, unmarked cars, grabbing people off the streets and whisking them away. Now you combine that with troops in American cities. And now Trump went to this assembly of generals, which is really remarkable. They put all the generals together, and the Secretary of Defense is up there talking to them about who knows what, but it seems to me that the whole gathering was to develop a sense of loyalty among the military establishment to Trump. And then Trump makes this remarkable statement that their job is to protect America from the enemy from within. I mean, we're talking about him perceiving this internal enemy that we need the troops here in the United States as compared to, trying to resolve problems over there. Now we're going to resolve the problems here, which means really a militarized society. When I'm seeing all this in terms of ICE agents and grabbing people off the streets, militarized border troops everywhere, all I keep thinking is Pinochet's regime in Chile, where the troop were exactly the same. Troops were all over the country. And then the enemy within, which is the protesters and the opponents of what's going on, everybody starts getting real quiet, real silence, because what you're talking about is really martial law at that point. Suspension of habeas corpus, suspension of due process. And as we all know, Trump's been pushing the envelope in that area on immigration. And a lot of these federal judges have backed down. There was one court of appeals that said, no, we're not going to cite the Trump administration for contempt for disobeying a judicial order of a district judge. Apparently they didn't want a constitutional crisis. Well, you think Trump didn't notice that? If he does this and he couches everything in terms of anti-terrorism, which is the magic word, the war on terrorism, with the narco traffickers, the way he's killing people in the Caribbean, the more violence here domestically, the militarization of society, I guarantee you, Richard, this is about as far from a free society as you'd ever find.
Well, you mentioned Pinochet's government in Chile. I mean, I want to broaden that imagery. Um, for our lifetimes watching the evening news, I'm not even talking about the network, just in general, the evening news, we have seen enough instances in international reporting when a coup d'etat occurs or there's civil unrest against an existing government, and the powers that be call in the military who are on the streets and they patrol, they arrest, they physically accost. If the demonstrators don't disperse, rubber or even real bullets are used. And we are aghast traditionally in the United States that this is somehow using the military to settle political disputes and therefore using an arm of undeniable weaponry and violence. And what bothered me along these lines, I didn't read the text of the Department of Defense's, excuse me, the Department of War's official statements to the generals the other day. I was catching part of it, clips on the news. And if I caught it right, he said that part of the rethinking of military tactics and strategies is the benchmarks of the military's rules of engagement against civilians, implying those are supposed to be loosened up. That the traditional idea that there's a separation between the enemy combatant and the civilian population, including in the enemy country, and that he wants to blur that distinction. Getting the enemy is more important than saving a civilian life. He's just in the way, and that's the cost of war. That's the implication that he was making the other day. This is dangerous because does that not seep into the use of military force if it's placed on the streets of America as well? These are dangerous, and this has nothing to do with saying, oh, generals should do calisthenics and get their beer bellies back in order, or even saying that, if you're going to have a military, you have a certain benchmark of training and expected to perform certain duties that should be gender neutral. That has nothing to do with that. You can believe in a classical liberal, very limited government military, and say everybody who's in the military should be fit. Yeah, people should be able to do the physical exertive work that's required, or they're ineligible to do a certain task. That has nothing to do with that stuff. It's what these people would be used for. That's what the problem is, right? What these people would be used for. And the idea of bringing them on the streets and now say that you want to revise the rules of engagement towards civilians. This is a dark thing. And for those who are more sympathetic to Trump and his policies, remember, once these precedents are set, you can never be sure that the man in the White House is going to be using these powers in ways that you like. The way I sometimes express it to my students. Imagine the politician who you dislike the most and trust the least. The politician you dislike the most and trust the least. And imagine him having these powers. Do you want it? That's the reason why you keep these powers out of the hands of any politician at all times. So these are choppy and dangerous waters.
Yeah, or her. I mean, imagine Kamala Harris with these same powers if she's elected, or Alejandra Cortez if she's done. And your point is, if you can't handle that, then you shouldn't be delegating the power to anybody. But Richard, the our American ancestors warned us about this. This is why some of the principal figures of the revolution, the American Revolution and the founding of our country, were so vehemently opposed to standing armies, which was the word they used for a national security state. They said, look what happens in history when you have a strong executive with the power to impose his will with this giant military. Who's going to stand up against it? Who has the capability of standing up against it? And now, obviously, the American people have an advantage that other people in many other countries don't have. They're well armed. If things really get bad enough, they can resist. And don't ever think that that kind of tyranny can't happen to your own country. Once you start thinking like that, you're finished. It can happen. And one of the best insurance policies we have to dissuade people in the government from trying this is that Americans are well armed. As a last recourse, they can resist. But who wants to go down that road? I mean, who wants to combat this gigantic, 82nd Airborne Division or something? And I have no doubts that whatever Trump orders, the troops will obey his orders. I mean, look at the invasion of Iraq. Totally illegal war, a war of aggression. Iraq had never attacked the United States, and the troops faithfully obeyed orders. They were supposed to support and defend the Constitution. Well, in their mind, when they're obeying the president's orders, who's democratically elected, they're supporting and defending the Constitution. So our founding fathers warned us about the dangers of standing armies and a powerful executive. And unfortunately, I think we're now seeing the wisdom of their warnings. The way Trump is consolidating power in the military, firing generals that are not totally loyal to him, appointing generals that he feels are going to be loyal to him, obey his orders. All you need is a big national emergency, say a big economic crisis, dollar cratering, stock market cratering, like a Great Recession type of emergency, um, along with a foreign policy crisis, like a war with Venezuela or whatever, along with drug war violence, where he's actually ordering the military to kill drug war suspects as a narco terrorist. He's combining the drug war with the war on terrorism, which is another big sham. And of course, the courts aren't going to step in and stop those kind of killings. And what's to stop him from doing the same thing here in the United States in the name of establishing law and order and protecting America from the enemy from within? These are very ominous circumstances, Richard, as far as the free society goes.
You were using the founding fathers and how they view these things. Let's remember that next year, 2026, will be the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776. And that if we use as the starting point of the colonialist rebellion of being, the year earlier with Concord and Lexington, the American Revolution against the legitimate domestic government was the British Crown. So that went on from 1775 with Lexington and Concord to Cornwallis's surrender at Yorktown in 1783. In other words, an 8-year war of rebellion against the legitimate government. And the Washington and those who rallied to serve in his resisting army, his guerrillas, they understood the importance of a right to bear arms against an enemy who was technologically far inferior to what a government has as its powers today. 8 years to defeat the British, even with the armaments of that time. Now, today, drones, surveillance equipment, the ability to bring in mechanized firing power, the capacity to break in and just arrest people to an extent and with a efficiency far greater than the British had against the American colonists. But this is why they were very concerned about any political authority, even one that was, quote, legitimate, that was abiding by the rules of respecting the rights of the citizens, to assure that the government didn't grow, the government didn't abridge, the government didn't suppress. The government had to be limited in its powers, including in its power to have a military force. That is, no primary standing army to preserve a free society. And today's military is a military of empire. And now it's not only a military of empire extended to other parts of the world, it's a military of empire being threatened within the nation itself.
Right. And let's keep in mind that this is a military that brought up Pinochet, that believed in Pinochet's regime, favored that regime, liked what they were doing with the torture and indefinite detention and horrible mistreatment of people, disappearing people, killing people. They were there supporting this thing, the CIA and the military. We can look at other areas where they've taken this position favoring what we would consider a tyrannical system, but what they consider is necessary to protect, quote, national security, like Guantanamo Bay. that where they established that torture center there and that prison camp there to be released from any restrictions of the Constitution. Torture, indefinite detention. I mean, people there for 20 years without a trial. Um, so that wraps up that subject. Before we wrap up, let me make a couple of announcements. First of all, next week we are going to have a special program with respect to Libertarian Angle for the next 6 weeks. Given the critical importance of civil liberties in our society and how civil liberties are under this extreme assault, we're going to devote the next 6 weeks to guest presenters they're going to be very notable names. Next week, we start out with Jim Bovard, who I'm sure most of you know, long been associated with FFF practically from our beginning. And each presenter is going to be presenting his perspective on the critical importance of civil liberties. And so I think you're going to really enjoy this program. It's going to be Libertarian Angle, just like here. Richard and I are going to be interacting with them. We'll be posting that on Thursdays of each week. It'll be pre-recorded. The other announcement I wanted to make is I finally got my 2 books on Amazon ready for sale. The Case for Open Borders, a primer, and El caso a favor de las fronteras abiertas, una introducción, a Spanish translation of the English book. It's a primer. It's a short, easy to read book. I'd say it takes about an hour and a half to read, $1. But here's the kicker. I just put up a promotion where everybody gets my books for free. Both books, Spanish and English, for the next 5 days, starting on October 2nd. So it'll go for another few days here till October 6th. So there's a chance to get a free book. It's not real expensive anyway. It's $1. That's what we're selling it for. But you get a chance to get it for free. It's the digital version, Kindle version, but any computer can download the Kindle app or your cell phone can download the Kindle app. So those 2 announcements. Richard, anything else before we part?
Yeah, I have a question. So in the English language of this version, do you refer to Americans and Americans, but in the Spanish version, you call them gringos?
Well, you have to buy the book to find that out, Richard. Or
Well,
get
good
it
luck
free.
on both of these books. I hope they do very well. And I know that they're on a timely issue that I really hope many of our viewers will take the time to purchase and read.
Well, I hope so, because I think I've addressed every single major objection to open borders. And my purpose was to have an easy to read, basic book for people to understand the concepts. And most important, to understand what we've been emphasizing for 35 years here at FFF, that there is only one solution. There is no other solution, just one solution to this perpetual ongoing immigration crisis, death, suffering, and immigration police state that is now expanding nationwide. And that solution is open borders. So that's the purpose of this book. On that note, Richard, we'll wrap things up. As always, enjoyed the conversation and look forward to talking to you next week with Jim Bovard.
Until next time with Jim.